They came back time after time after time, daily. On average, you're talking about, well, on some occasions, a dozen girls per day. In actual fact, there's quite a number of girls that came back 2 or 3 times a day. They used to sort of come in the morning, disappear lunchtime, come again after lunch, disappear at tea time, and then came again in the evening. And these were the same girls that continuously did this sort of thing.
To your knowledge, did any of them ever say anything about this to any adult, to their parents?
Not to my knowledge. Had anyone said anything to an adult, I'm quite sure I would have had a visit, which I didn't have.
The discovery that 2 out of every 3 children who've been involved in sex with an adult will not tell is certainly the most worrying of all our findings. Before we can even think of trying to tackle this huge problem, we've got to find a way of persuading children to speak out about their experiences. And the first step in that task is finding out why they've remained silent in the past. Paedophiles can bring a wide range of pressures to bear on a child, some subtle, some more obvious. In Lucy's case, she was crudely intimidated into a 7-year silence by the family's lodger.
The older I got, the worse it got. He did more worse things to me. And I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. And he used to threaten me, said he'd kill me or something. I didn't like going near him, but like, when my mum would go to bed, he'd come in, he didn't care if I was asleep, and he'd just start. I was scared of him. Just frightened.
In one case where a child of 4 was being abused, the abuser took a picture of the child's mother and said to the child, if you do anything and you tell anyone what we're doing, your mother will die. And he took the picture and he took a knife and slashed the picture and then lit it with a match, and it burned up. And the child saw this. Now, if you were a 4-year-old child and you'd been abused, but somebody told you, if you told that that would happen to your mother, would you tell? This child didn't.
As Lucy told Pauline Searchfield, the policewoman who investigated her case, rewards for cooperating sexually and for keeping quiet also played a part in her 7-year silence.
He used to bribe me by buying anything I wanted. He used to, when I walk down the street, I see something, come back, he'd buy it for me straight away. If I just got everything I wanted, if I just see something, I would get it.
But as Pauline Searchfield has discovered time and again in her work, in the hands of a paedophile, bribery can turn into a potent weapon.
Invariably, there are rewards for the abuse, and he uses this to put the guilt on the child. The fact that the child actually took a gift for doing whatever the man... That's the way he's made the child believe.
That's what Lucy thought for some time.
As I grew older, I was about 11, I see a thing, a programme on the girl was abused by her father, and I started to realise that he was doing something wrong. But when he started to realise that I knew he was doing something wrong, he just got violent and he used to just drag me on the bed or something. I used to feel guilty that it was me because I never said anything to anybody. But now I'm just sort of like getting out now that it wasn't my fault, it was his fault. There was something wrong with him. And now I'm coping better than I did when it first all came out.
Children don't tell, sometimes because they feel they're responsible. They feel guilty for what has happened. Sometimes their body has involuntarily responded to the abuse. It's not surprising if the abuse sometimes feels good. And if it feels good, the offender will say, you see, it felt good to you, therefore you enjoyed it. Therefore, if you tell people, I'll say to people that it was your idea. So children don't tell because of guilt. They don't tell because of the fear of reprisals. They sometimes don't tell because they don't know there's anything the matter with it.
Whatever the reason that children don't tell, there's no doubt that their experiences lead to permanent harm, sometimes physical, but almost always emotional. Few escape unscathed.
And over the years I just felt dirty going to school, looking at my friends, they're clean, but inside I was dirty. Every day I have to have a bath. because I feel my body is still dirty, and I just don't like it because I feel dirty inside, and make sure I have a bath in the morning and a wash-off shower before I go to bed. I don't like being in men. I don't like giving my dad a kiss, cuddle. I don't like going near like men, like giving me a cuddle, hello, and it's just made me turn off a boys.
It's the loss of innocence, the loss of childhood. It's that never having really been a child and being valued just for being you is actually the realisation that you've been used and abused. And I think, as one girl put it, you know, if he could do this to me, then I must have been worth less than nothing.
But there's a final, terrible consequence. The victims of today become the offenders of tomorrow. All three of the men we interviewed were introduced to sex as children.
He was a friend of the family. He had done very much what I eventually ended up doing. Found his way into the family circle by being friendly with my parents. Talking to me about his prowess in the Royal Marines and his experiences in the Korean War, sort of thing that any 13, 14-year-old boy would be interested in. He was an exceptionally nice man. But he began to invite me out with him in his car. Nothing happened still until eventually I went to stay away with him in a hotel once. And we walked into the bedroom and there was a double bed.
And in the Addington case, it has now come to light that most of the men there, too, were involved in child sex when they were boys.
Some of the men that we've arrested for these offences have in the past themselves been victims of similar offences. Obviously, they were totally corrupted by their experiences and are now the second generation, and in turn corrupting the next generation.
It's a natural cycle.
And that's the problem.
The knowledge that today's victims are likely to be tomorrow's offenders gives added urgency to the task of breaking that vicious cycle. So what can be done? Well, given the problems of getting children to speak out, the most direct approach might be to take the offenders out of circulation. It's 6 a.m. in South London. Officers of the Obscene Publications Squad gather for a final briefing before raiding the house of a suspected pornographer.
We suspect the occupier is actively engaged in the distribution of child pornography.
Experience of cases like the Burrell affair has convinced police that one way to catch the paedophiles is through the suppliers of child pornography.
Well, we should find quantity of child pornography and correspondence which indicates that the man who's in possession of it is distributing the material to other people.
We weren't allowed beyond the main doors, but we could follow the progress of the raid via a concealed tape recorder carried by one of the police officers.
I'm Inspector Baker, Obscene Publications Branch, New Scotland Yard. That is a warrant to search your address because I suspect that you've got indecent photographs of children. We've got an awful lot of correspondence here. I see you're into the North American Man-Boy Love Bulletin.
Will you be taking this?
We'll probably take this. It looks as if it could be of interest to us.
The police hope that such a haul will lead to a conviction on pornography. It may also yield information identifying paedophiles, but they haven't the manpower to mount as many raids as they'd like. And even when successful, getting a conviction for molesting a child is difficult. The child's unsupported evidence is rarely enough. Janie was repeatedly molested by her gym teacher.
He said, let me show you. He said, let me tuck your belly in. And he said, oh, OK then. But instead of putting his hand on the outside of my leotard, he pulled it open and he went inside. I was just really stunned. I couldn't move.
Janie eventually became so distressed she told her mother, who told the police. But other children weren't prepared to speak out. And she found that without obvious physical signs of sexual abuse, the word of a 9-year-old by itself wasn't enough to get the case into court.
He wasn't brought to justice. He was charged, but they dropped the charges because of insufficient evidence. And consequently, his colleagues and friends assumed that he was innocent and he's back working with children again. The police officer explained that a child of that age, they rarely take the evidence of a child against that of an adult.
People who abuse children will often go for very young children, knowing full well that if they are caught and there is no medical evidence, that the case won't come to court because the children are too young to testify, and even if they could testify, the judge has to tell the jury to disregard or to take their evidence in a way that almost with a grain of salt. You can't actually believe what children say.
Ray Wire has worked in one of the special prison units for the few paedophiles who are convicted and sent to jail. He believes that even if they're imprisoned, it makes little difference to their behaviour.
They will spend their time talking about what they do. They will be normalising their behaviour, blaming, justifying, denying, excusing, all those characteristics of sex offenders. So if you put them together and don't actually confront or work with that, you're actually probably making it worse. I know one man used to get Mother Care magazine in. Health and Efficiency, again, was a common magazine because it has naked children in it, so they can continually feed their sexual orientation and arousal.
Child Abuse Team, Addington.
In fact, paedophiles are more likely to re-offend than any other single group. Of those who are caught and sent to prison, 3 out of 4 are soon back behind bars. And at Addington's special unit investigating child sexual abuse, they're only too familiar with the failure of prison to reform these men.
So I had a recent case, in actual fact, where a man was arrested by me for indecently assaulting a 12-year-old boy. He went to the High Court and was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment for the assault on that child. Within 2 days of his release from prison, he was at this station asking for me, and he asked me for the address of the child.
With detection and imprisonment unable to make long-term changes in the men, much attention is now focusing on trying to persuade them to stop of their own free will. Experts say that there's no complete cure for the condition, but doctors like Jerry Silverman of St Bernard's Hospital, Ealing, can block the sex drive of patients like Michael by what's been dubbed chemical castration.
We've brought along your injection, your magic cure, okay? So
in fact, since Michael's been taking this course of injections, he claims that his life has been transformed. Doctors agree that he can be released. This week, he's going home.
I still feel attracted to children. I mean, I've been, as I say, I've been around a little bit on my own this last week or so, and I still feel attracted to children, but there's no sexual drive there, you know. I look at them and nothing happens, so to speak, you know. I don't get excited or a feeling of pleasure from looking at them.
If he keeps on with the medication, if he remains monitored and blood levels are checked regularly and dosages are kept appropriate, the days of offending, of sexually offending for Michael are over, and hopefully therefore the days of imprisonment are over.
Chemical castration isn't the only method being tried in an effort to change the paedophiles' attitudes. Ray Wire's group counselling sessions are designed to modify men's behaviour by forcing them to acknowledge the damage they've inflicted on a child.
We move into victim awareness, and through victim awareness I'm going to demonstrate to him the psychological, physical, emotional impact of his offending upon children. I want him to be aware of what he does. Relationships. To say to yourself, well, I can't be doing that much harm then.
Yes. I very often used to say, well, you know, this particular boy, of course, grew up and he got married and raised a family of his own, so I can't have done him much harm.
Can I ask others?
Neil, George and John are all members of Ray's group, and while they've been with him, they've all stayed out of trouble. But both kinds of therapy have a major flaw. Their success relies entirely on the paedophiles wanting to abandon their sexual habits enough to sacrifice time or energy or their sex drive. Only a minority volunteer. Most paedophiles remain undetected, unpunished and untreated. Experience shows that trying to eliminate the threat of the paedophiles is a difficult and long-term process. It may even be impossible. So most experts working in the field, whether as police officers, psychologists or therapists, now believe that efforts should focus on the children in the hope that educating them to say no may frustrate the child molesters' schemes. Michelle Elliott works closely with schools in a program she's designed to protect children from molesters. It's called Kidscape. older children like these at the Montem School in Islington are encouraged to devise and act out situations in which they might be in danger so as to arrive at the correct response.
And so I went into the living room and did it, and then the doorbell rang. So I went and answered it. It was that next door neighbour, you know that one.
Oh, that friendly neighbour.
Yeah, well, he's a bit too friendly.
Smaller children are introduced to the subject more obliquely, with the help of teachers acting out a bullying scene.
1, 2, 3.
Michelle Elliott's aim with Kidscape is to get children to say no to molesters, and if they can't, to tell someone. And she thinks you can't start too young.
Would you stay with your friends?
The earlier the better. We start with young children, and the first thing we teach them is to listen to and obey adults without question. We beat no out of them. Young children naturally say no. We spend all of our lives saying to them, don't say no. If we start when they're 3, 4, and 5 and say, you don't always have to do what all adults tell you. Come and tell me if you've got a problem. And if anyone asks you to keep a secret, don't come and tell. Then you're in with a chance to actually change their behavior. The older they get, the more ingrained it becomes to listen to and do what adults say.
As a result of Kidscape, many children have found a way out of damaging sexual experiences. John Ruddock works for East Sussex Education Authority, one of the first to launch Kidscape into its schools. He has no doubts that it's effective.
It's very difficult to be exact about that, but certainly we could identify something in excess of 50 children that since we started the Kidscape programme are now not being abused.
Michelle Elliott sees Kidscape not just as a way of protecting children now, it's also a way of breaking the cycle of sexual abuse for the future.
If we don't start with something like prevention, we never will break the cycle, because once children are abused, they sometimes grow up to abuse, and the cycle goes on and on. Doesn't mean that all children who are abused grow up to abuse, however. This type of prevention program is effective to a certain degree. We can teach little children to tell at the first sign that something's the matter. You can't obviously always keep all children safe, but it is a start. Just like you can't keep all children safe from being run over by cars, but we continue to help them, and we don't know how many we prevent in the end.
Kidscape and similar programs are clearly a ray of hope, but they'll take time to work and may never reach all those at risk. Tonight, there are still tens of thousands of children who have been or are being drawn into sexual relations by adults. We can, of course, as parents, be more aware. We can appeal to those paedophiles who are not totally cynical in their pursuit of children to recognize the damage that they're causing. But ultimately, the first step in a child's defense is to persuade him or her to speak out. As our contribution to that task, we're running a helpline this weekend. It's open now. Whoever you are, if you have something to say, if you wish to break down that wall of silence, then you can phone on the number we'll give you. One little girl did tell. The man who molested her was charged and convicted. For her, speaking out ended a 7-year-long nightmare.
I think there are a lot of children in that they're scared to say something, because if they're threatening them that they're taken away from their parents, they won't say anything. But if the threats are just sayings, they're not the truth, they wouldn't do anything, because it happened to me and I wasn't killed. I'm still alive. They just say that.
The helpline referred to in the London programme is now open. The number to ring is 928 5656. Whoever you are, whatever you want to say, there are expert counsellors to talk to on the end of the phones. You don't have to give your name unless you want to. The helpline is open tonight till 1:30 a.m. and again on Saturday and Sunday from 12 noon to midnight. The number again, 928 5656.